we explore what energizes leaders and how that energy fuels performance, connection, and growth. I'm Brady Wilson, the co-founder of Juice Inc. And in this episode, I sit down with our very own Kris MacQueen, my business partner, senior developer, and facilitator here at Juice. And we talk about one of what we call the 5 driving needs. We're going to be talking about belonging and the impact that that is having on people, how it fuels their energy, and how that unlocks performance and great results. So, Kris, really excited to have you on the show today, and I'm just going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brady. So it's interesting. Of the 5 driving needs that we find ourselves talking about, belonging is one of those that you occasionally see a certain look come into people's eyes as you say, these. So again, in our language, we would say these are oxygen-like, meaning we got to have this sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. Like we actually will start to spiral if we feel like we belong to nobody and to no place and to nothing. Right? Mm-hmm. And so the premise here is that this is indispensable. It is not optional, and a biologically urgent need, and absolutely alive in the workplace. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong in your experience, this is somewhat anecdotal, but there can be a certain energy around this one. Like nobody resists the idea that we need to feel a certain level of security or freedom or significance or meaning. Like those seem to be a little bit easier for people to digest. And yet it's funny because there are some characteristics and some markers that we've been able to start to see as we've measured people's relationships with these driving needs that suggest that belonging has a really profound story to tell. But I find that so interesting that if there's any resistance to the notion that, do all 5 of these belong in that category of absolute driving need? Belonging tends to be that one that people go, well, yeah, sure. Right. So you get that somewhere else. You get that from home or your people. And yet, it's funny when the fire comes on. So fire, what do I mean by that? When the pressure is on, when uncertainty is everywhere, when numbers are hard to get by, it tends to be the last standing of the driving needs that has, if it has been invested in, if it has been cultivated, it tends to be the through line through some of those deep, dark moments that organizations can go through. And would you say that squares up with your experience, both in terms of our own story and what you're witnessing out there in the world?
So true. And when I see you delivering the 5 driving needs material, that moment where you say, here are these 5 oxygen-like needs that I'm going to talk about, and belonging shows up, you can see if security, freedom, significance mean check, and it's like, come on. And I know that one of the things you do is you say, okay, I get that. This one's hard to swallow. And then you start talking about the prison system.
Yes. Yeah. And so let's look at that for a moment. So here we have, let's just consider the hardest criminal elements of society. Let's paint a picture in our minds, and I know we don't want to give over to our biases too much, but I think there's an archetype we can grab a hold of, and what we do not necessarily associate with hard criminal element is warm and fuzzy person who needs to feel a sense of belonging with those around. I mean, that's not what the first thing that comes to mind for me.
No.
And yet we also know when we ask when we poll the room and ask the question, okay, so what is the worst punishment that can be doled out when one of those individuals seriously steps out of line?
Isolation.
It is. it is being cut off from the community that exists, from the people who they are part of, they're interconnected with. And this has been looked at. I mean, the impact for us when we feel cut off, it's as if somebody punched us in the stomach.
Yeah.
Right? It lives in our physiology, this sense that I must belong. And of course, this, we don't need to get into all of the biological roots and where all of this stuff came from. But let's just say that for most of the human story, we lived or died based on whether or not we were surrounded by people who were looking out for our best interest.
Yeah.
It historically has been a non-negotiable. And so even though we might look at all of the constituent parts of survival and say, well, are we fed? Check. Do we have a secure dwelling? Check. Do we have a paycheck? Check. We could put a check mark beside all of those things. And so we may not have that existential threat, but it actually lives in that category in our brains and in our emotions. And so because it can feel like the warm fuzzy thing, and by the way, it is that for some, but I don't believe that belonging is that for everybody. I don't think there's a one size fits all for what it means to belong. But because it feels a little bit disconnected from existential survival, it can be easy for us to overlook or even to take for granted. And so when we actually start with belonging, I mean, it's the very first thing we talk about when we talk about the 5 driving needs. And Brady, I would actually love to pick your brain for a moment, because in the early days of putting all of this together, you decided that belonging was the place that we start. And I would love to get your thinking around that.
Thank you. It started off with a deep dive into the different constituent parts of what might be oxygen-like. And it wasn't long before I bumped into very, very substantive pieces of research that showed that social exclusion, as you've already pointed to, psychologically, it is as painful as a slap to the face. But why? And we go just a bit deeper, and again, we're not going to geek out on this, but I was looking at 9 substantive pieces of research that say that belonging in close social relationships and having affiliation and a sense of trust and harmony, etc., is a greater predictor of your physical health than whether you exercise, whether you smoke, and the quality of your diet. Now, those are big predictors of your physical health. And it's interesting, the World Health Organization has classified loneliness as a massive threat. And this is not just because of COVID, partly because of COVID, but the U.S. Surgeon General is saying that in terms of the mortality effects of loneliness, it is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So if you are cut off, isolated, feeling a sense of social exclusion, you can be doing all the exercise, not smoking, you can have a great quality of diet, but your markers are probably going downhill. It's that important.
Right.
It's that vital. And so why? I mean, well, it just seems to be the one, and I think you're going to speak to this, that is most durable, and it's operational in terms of our ability to get to the other 4. So if I want to have a life of meaning, good luck if you don't have quality relationships and a sense of belonging and inclusion. Good luck getting to a sense of significance, or to establish any sense of meaningful freedom and autonomy, or security. And so there's something about this belonging piece that is it unlocks the other ones. And I think you've done some really nice research, Kris, around especially quality connections.
Yeah.
And which sits under the belonging bucket.
It does. Yeah, it's definitely part of, and so we have done some research with people that we've done work with, and we have people self-assess. So if they select one of the constituent, as you said, the constituent parts of the belonging need, and they have an opportunity. There's things like healthy culture and trusted relationships, team harmony and quality
Working
connections.
in my sweet spot.
Working my sweet spot, right? So and so we then have people rate essentially, well, what is the relationship between this and your overall energy that you're bringing to your day in, day out? Is it energizing? Is it depleting? What's going on? And what we found is that those blue cards in general, we use cards for people to select this stuff. Those needs in general and quality connections in particular, seem to have more energy in them than any of the other ones. And it tends to be more sustained over time and more predictable, less variable. Where some of the other needs can have lots of peaks and valleys, you tend to see that people who really value and are putting, like, specifically naming it, this is something that really matters to me right now. It tends to really be a driver for them, a sustainable source of fuel. Now, interestingly, it is very rarely the top thing that they're grabbing at. Right? So when people rank out what matters most, it is very rarely the thing that they are getting up in the morning for. And so again, what we can learn from that is it is very important. It's vital for anything. Anytime we want to talk about sustainability, being able to maintain performance over time, it really matters. And it really tends to not crack the top. That's not the superstar. It's not the first place that people go. This is the team player, right? This is that player that's not necessarily getting the headlines, but the team falls apart without it. And so the really interesting thing is that what we found is that the people who said, not only is this, so quality connections in particular, not only is it important to me, those who said, this is my deal breaker, meaning they said, at the end of the day, I cannot do my job if I do not have quality connections, right? So that strong declaration. And we found that those individuals experienced very little depletion.
Yes.
And it was a marked difference. It was actually when we looked at the data that came back, it was the strongest data point. It just over-indexed towards releasing energy. And so when we start to think about the relationship between that and some of the other things that we can see, there are some needs that we would say are really dependent on other people. If I am seeking significance, I kind of need to have a feedback loop from other people to verify that I am making significance, that I am significant, rather. Right? That I'm making a difference for them. There is something, and when we look at it, something like security, well, I only have so much control over my security. In fact, I have very little control in some ways over my security. I rely on other people for that. The interesting thing is that belonging, of all of the 5 driving needs that we've identified, it is the one that we have the most agency over. There's we have this direct connection, regardless of what is happening around us. Our numbers can be tanking. There are stories of imprisoned individuals, so no freedom, who are doing menial tasks, no significance, no meaning. And yet are able to cultivate lifelong relationships, are able to to really pull on an energy source, even in the absence of all those other things. And I find that very interesting, that the one thing that we can so easily overlook is actually the area that we might possibly have the most control over. And so I think that there is a story there, particularly in seasons and times where you've got organizations that are starting to flounder. And we're looking for what can we control. We need to keep our eye on those other targets. And let's not forget that the one place we can always have an impact is in our sense of belonging to one another, the kinds of connections that we are cultivating with the people around us. That seems to be what I'm seeing. What sorts of things are you seeing when you hear this, or hearing rather when you hear this data?
I would just want to align with you 100% on the extent to which we have agency. And what's interesting to me is that, not that I recommend this, but I don't even have to have a real human being in order to get that connection. Now and I'm not talking about virtual. I'm just talking about that there are practices that we can step into where we select a memory, an experience from the past that was deeply meaningful with someone who matters to us, and we can bring that back to our memory, relive that experience, and there is a release of dopamine and serotonin that comes with the reliving of that experience with that special person. And so, I mean, that's how, in one sense, sneaky belonging and connection is that it can impact us when we don't even have that tangible human being at our fingertips or in proximal relationship. Now, of course, when we can actually reach out and have the phone call or whatever, and face to face just takes it up to another level of magic in terms of the interplay of neuromodulators. But the agency we have, and what you and I have seen, is that when people make a profound connection on what matters most to another person, and that person feels seen and heard, not only does it affect them and all of their neurochemistry, but it affects you by doing that. And in the space of 2 minutes, we can see a person tell a very quick story of something that matters to them, another person acknowledge what they're hearing and say, did I get this right? And within 120 seconds, we have a profound release of oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. Who cares about those? But what it is priming our brain with something that is very generative in terms of how I can now step into the rest of my day. So that's why we really feel that this belonging need is so foundational and such a great place to start because it's accessible. I have huge agency and the effect can be immediate.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that, right? It does actually make us smarter when we are around people who we feel like they get us.
Yeah.
And when we think, how do we create a sense of belonging? And again, I'm not going to throw the various different strategies under the bus that are out there. There are lots of great initiatives to be able to foster the sense of connection and trust and rapport. And at the end of the day, though, if we distill it all down, if I hear out of your mouth, you articulate something that really matters to me, that is a homecoming of sorts.
Yeah, that's a beautiful word.
Right? In that space. And so, and there are two elements to this. So I love that reminder that there's the personal agency. We can use our memories, our previous experiences to be able to access some of those resources. So if I am starting to feel like I'm off my game, or I'm starting to feel like I am an alien in an unfamiliar context, I can remember experiences and call those to mind. I remember doing that during the COVID years. where there was heavy lockdowns, and going and remembering a recent experience that my wife and I had. We were traveling with two of our dearest friends. And I remember this vividly, sitting around a table in Athens, eating great food. The wind, there was a soft breeze. It was warm, but not too warm. It was shaded, and that moment fueled me through times of extraordinary disconnection, so that I was able to just continue to show up with whatever I had. Now, not a time of thriving, but it was a deep resource, and so there's real value in that on a personal level. And the other piece of this that I think is so essential is that innovation and solutioning and problem solving and resilience on a team, those are all conduited by trust. I don't know that we can get any of those if there is a breakdown of trust.
Yeah.
And so when we start to think about the networking effect, and you've done some great work on how networks work. But when we can network, when we can bring together our collective brilliance, we all know that if you get a bunch of people in a room who are particularly smart and there's trust and they start working a problem, the solution is not just times the number of people in the room. There's some exponential factor that comes in when we can start to network. And so fat chance getting there if there's not that sense of we that exists.
Yeah.
And so there is that self management, self leading component that we are less reliant, maybe in some ways, on others, or we have at least a deep well we can pull from when we're feeling some sense of disconnection. But then there's the fruit of all of that on a team when you can start to build that, and that stuff means an awful lot too.
It does. I think organizations that are trumpeting the fact that they are really about DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion, but they haven't really pressed into belonging. And good luck, because I think that the wavelength that we would hope to be telegraphed out through an organization is be absolutely unique. You absolutely belong, both.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that groundedness that values belonging as one of those oxygen-like needs, then I think we look at each other and our acceptance of one another, and when somebody kind of is a little bit outside of the comfortable bandwidth, whether that be politics, age, race, etc., sexuality, it's like, yeah, your acceptance and belonging here is very, very conditional.
Right.
And so I think we've got to crack the code on this if we're going to go beyond just some sort of trumpeting this on our website. And so getting into our team dynamic, and you've already said it, we're smarter. So, we've done the research around, are you smarter around some people than you are around others? And when we ask that to a group of people, they just start chuckling, and it's like right across the room. And so like 90% what is that? Like my native intellect doesn't change. Why am I able to access and be more fluid and articulate with some people, and with others, I can't even get out, even if I'm a subject matter expert. And there is something around, you don't belong.
Yeah.
I'm judging you. I am looking down on you. I'm patronizing you. I am condescending towards you. And at the profound level, you don't make it to my table. You don't have a voice here. Whereas with those other people who seem to have a sense of inclusion and belonging and acceptance and holding space, people say that I can come up with my best ideas with that person. So, I mean, if you're looking for the dark, solid causal line of results between belonging and performance, it's not a hard one to find. It's
No.
just that I think we don't trust it as leaders because it's like I just want to get to the metrics, right?
Well, and I want to just explore for a moment to, again, belonging, it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we can start to understand what it is that matters to somebody and how to step into the we, how to define the we, that can be really helpful. And I'm thinking back, this is one of my very worst moments as an employee. So I won't name any names. But I was a young man in a factory.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the owners of the business, it was a smaller organization, came out. We had no relationship. There was no sense of we. There'd been no effort put into that. And, this individual had just graduated, had a fresh MBA, was all full of ideas, was full of just wanted to measure everything. And I remember he came out with a stopwatch. This was back in the day where there was these stopwatches, not digital things.
Yeah.
And watched my every movement click, click, click. And let me ask you, Brady, what happened to my performance in that moment? Did it go up or did it go down?
Let me guess.
Right?
Plummeting. Yeah.
Now I'm not anti measuring and trying to look for optimization, but there could have been a very different approach, which was, hey, Kris, can we step into something? I really want to figure out if we're doing this the very best way. Could we together sit down and figure this thing out? I'm going to sit and we're going to look at the different parts of what you're doing and sit down and see if we can do this better together. That might have resulted in a very different kind of energy for me in terms of co-creation. And so when you talk about creating a sense of we, it doesn't necessarily mean that we feel all warm, fuzzy things when the other person walks in the room and we become everybody's best friend. That is actually not what we're talking about here. But we are talking about very intentional, meaningful connections around the things that matter. Because what he didn't know is that I love to drive for improvement. And so made no effort to harness that energy. And instead, I just felt like I was under a microscope. Totally. And so I think there are things where we can extrapolate and look for right sizing what the kind of belonging that's really going to serve us here. Right. And there's being able to find what matters most and center on that can really help us save a lot of unnecessary energy rather than telegraphing what we assume that means to other people.
I really like that. And so what matters most in terms of belonging, if we can look at so many different elements of it, but if we just look at time for a second, there are those that for what matters most for them is the micro moment. We call those quality connections.
Yeah.
There are others, what matters most for them are trusted relationships. Now, there's a long arc and a story to those that has to do with track record and your intentions and motivations and your character. And so you don't develop this one in a moment, but you actually can develop a quality connection in a moment. And here's a quick example. I work very closely with cooperators for, 30 years. And so at one point, the CEO of a cooperators organization in Canada, Kathy Bardswick, would get on the elevator to the ground floor, and there's another employee in there. And by the time they would reach the 6th floor, that person was talking to Kathy about her golden retriever and had to go to the vet, and that's fine and feels seen in a moment. But that's not what mattered most. What mattered most is a month later, Kathy gets back on that same elevator with that person and turns to them and says, "How is your golden retriever?" His name was like Jojo or something like that. How did that trip to the vet go for you? So what they said to me in the cooperators was, "I will do anything for that person." Now, all she did was listen. No, that's not quite right. She saw people. And so, there's that greeting in Africa where is Salbono, which means I see you. And it's actually beyond that. It's like, I see you and all of your ancestors. But really what's happening there is I'm being placed in the world. Every time you greet me, if I believe that you see me and my ancestors, it places me in the world. And belonging is all about being placed in the world. It's about being placed in this team where I know where I stand. I'm not worried about who is rejecting me or accepting me. I'm being placed. And so there are so many things we can do from the micro moment right through to those longer trusted relationships where we have a culture and a leader has demonstrated conversational hygiene and insisted upon normative behavior around we never speak behind each other's back here.
Yeah.
We always speak our truth face to face. And they've developed that culture that when the new person comes and starts whispering gossip in your ear, the first thing that somebody says is, have you talked to that person? Because we actually we never do that here. Well, that person is either going to self-select out of the team or they're going to find a new way of being because the leader has created normative culture around belonging that because this long arc of trusted relationships matters so much that we have to have conversational hygiene around gossip or complaining or things like that. So there's so much that can be done that's so practical around a culture of belonging.
Yeah, and something that you said, and it might be a nice place to sort of start to land, I think, this conversation, but, this idea that when I am seen by somebody, my willingness to partner with that individual, to go above and beyond for that individual, to give an eager yes rather than a reluctant yes, is really transformed.
Yeah.
And I remember this was a number of years ago, and in fact, you were delivering to a team in which I belonged. This was my first encounter with some of the things that we talk about here. And you made a statement that knocked me on my butt. We're gonna keep the language rating for this G. But I remember it bowled me over. And you said, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but leaders, we've trained one another. We've learned how to try to be really interesting. And that is a very, very different thing from skill set from being interested.
Yeah.
And one of those generates a lot more goodwill than the other. And in that moment, I realized that just the truth of that as a leader, I had been equipped and trained to hold attention,
Right.
to drive vision, to articulate a way forward, to make decisions, to be the person who would be interesting and of interest. And I had done very little work and certainly had received very little support in developing the skill set of being interested. And when we think about how do we cultivate and grow that sense of belonging, I don't know, I might be oversimplifying this a little bit, but I think if we show up in an interested way, we've just done the lion's share of the hard work. I would love to get your thought on that.
I agree with you. And I don't think we have to look much further than just the wiring in our brains. And again, we're not going to geek out on this, but the simple fact is that we human beings are deeply, deeply affected by moments of connection in which somebody exhibits authentic interest in us and sees what matters most. And to your point earlier on, just verbalize. This proves that they get it in the most natural way possible. What we don't see in the interior, but we feel, is that oxytocin is flowing richly, that neuromodulator that is responsible for rapport and bonding and trust and that sense of, I would work with you.
Yeah.
So who doesn't need more of that? If you're working on a team, if you have a teenager, no matter what you do in life, if you could have that effect on other people by being interested and demonstrating that you get it, and releasing oxytocin wherever you go, right? I just think a lot of things will get a lot easier for people.
Yeah. I love that. And so as people are listening or watching this, I think my send off would be, as we look at the 5 driving needs, and again, we would say that they are all essential. They're not the same, but we're not going to get very far if any one of them goes completely missing. So belonging, security, freedom, significance, and meaning. But what do I want to say about belonging? The data actually demonstrates that it might just be the last soldier on the field when things get really tense in your world. If we've done the good work of investing in that, this might just be the need that rescues the others out of the pit. And so it is something to be mindful of and to be investing in. That would be, Brady, what would your send-off thought here be, do you think?
I think you nailed it. When I have been with people on their deathbeds, they're not thinking about security.
Mm-hmm.
They're not thinking about freedom. And counterintuitively, they're not even thinking about significance and meaning. They're thinking about relational things.
Yeah.
Who is beside them? Who is it that they have loved? Who is it that is loving them? The thing that is left, that is enduring, is belonging.
Yeah.
And so it's a good place to start, when the lights become bright and you've come through that long, dark tunnel. After you get that little spank on the bum, but then you get laid on your mother's chest, it's the first thing you feel.
Huh.
First thing you feel. You haven't done a thing to deserve any sense of significance or meaning or anything like that, but the very first and most primal thing you're going to sense is belonging. And maybe the very, very last thing that you breathe in and out.
May it be so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for this conversation.
Yeah, you too.